records so we can post this. Cool. Here we go. So basically, yeah, so I posted I just changed the due date to midnight tonight to give you a little bit more time on that. And I'm like, as I'm going through this, like doing this stuff in class, it's come clear that this stuff is, this is really big. So I'm not gonna be able to get through 4 in class today. So the plan is to do just 3 today. And then I'm gonna shoot a video right after class. And then I'll have that online if you want to watch that.
I get Jordan.
If you actually want to use the
Jordan's got his video on.
You should give us until Sunday for 4.
Behind him.
Wait, who's talking? Johnny, you got your mic on.
What's up? Oh, word.
That's fine if you want to keep it. But
no,
I
thought I muted it. My bad. What's
up?
No,
I mean, you're welcome to talk if you need to. I was getting some weird, like you were talking to somebody else or something.
Morning.
All right, so yeah, so we're gonna basically do lesson 3 today, and then I'm gonna post lesson 4. But everything's due tonight because I want to keep things moving. The temptation is to push things back, but we've got a lot to get through here. So with that, just quick discussion. How where are you guys at? How where like have you guys gotten through stuff? Where like kind of I just want to check in where everybody's at right now.
Just got through 3.
Okay, nice. So we've got somebody got
finished 2.
Okay.
Yeah, I finished 1 and 2.
Okay, cool. That sounds about right.
I finished 2, read through 3 and 4, and then just kind of waiting for the visual, like reconfirmation, so that when I do it myself, it goes a lot faster.
Yeah, I know, and that kind of brings me to the next point, though. It's like, are you learning anything, or are you just following directions?
Definitely learning.
Cool.
It definitely holds your hand a lot less after 1.
Yeah.
1 forever because there was so much to read, but then number 2 it like gave you a lot less. It kind of just it assumes that you know what you're doing.
Yeah, and you do have to fumble around a little bit, and there's so like I think this kind of like method is their workflow is really 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 solid. In fact, the guy I took the teaching class from is the guy who wrote this thing. It's actually from the Conservatory of Recording Arts and Sciences out of Arizona. That's the guys who wrote this thing, Crass. And it's actually pretty good. Has anybody watched the little associated videos that go with it? Like that Brock dude? That's the guy who wrote all this stuff, and that's who I took the class from. So really nice guy. Like his inflection is funny in those videos, and I'm kind of doubling up doing the exact same thing in my thing here. But I find that like there's so much information. It's dense. Every single little button does something that's important, that as you're going through and you're trying to follow the directions with the book, that it makes sense when you're going through it. But I have to say, this is probably my 5th time going through this thing, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm starting to really feel like maybe 6th time at this point. Like I'm really starting to understand it and gluing pieces together. So I think the thing is out of this is not being necessarily able to do everything all the time, but knowing that's possible, so that you have a reference. So when you're sitting there and you're hopefully working on a real game, you're like, wait, I remember something about this. That now you at least have a solid reference for this thing to go back with. If you want to go on and do the certification for the WISE 101 certification, and even cooler, if you want to do the WISE 110 certification, then you have to kind of go through this a couple more times. So for the 110, which I took, to get the 135 certification, which is the teacher one, I had to take the 110, but the 110 is free. So, but to do the 110, you have to have you have to pay for the 101. So it's kind of weird, but basically, so the 110 is basically an advanced 101 certification, and it's free. And I'm not like me and like 5 other people in the country can give it. So if anybody wants to do the 110, we can do that at the end of this block. But you have to be 101 certified before you can do the 110 stuff. So just throwing it out there. We'll do it as an option, like on a weekend or whenever, what works for anybody, if anybody wants to do it. But just throwing that out there. But I will say that the 110 is hard. You have to do it, and it's a closed book, closed web. You have to do it, and it's time limited. You have 2 hours to do this entire project with no reference. You're not allowed to you can look at help files, but you can't look at the the 101 stuff. So you're on your own to do it, and it's pretty hard. And so I was sweating, but it's a good one. But it's like people fail that one a lot because it's hard. It's basically doing the exact same thing we did. It's doing cube from beginning to end in 2 hours with no reference. And they throw you some curveballs in there, like stuff that's not in any of the quizzes or tests that you have to figure out, and it's pretty tough. So, but if anybody's interested in doing that, I mean, again, the certification thing, we can debate all day about that. If it's actually worthwhile, it's like getting Pro Tools certified, right? Like nobody cares what your certifications are; they care what you've done, and they care the actual projects you've done. And so we'll be talking more about that after this block, because we have 2 projects that are happening over right now at the DAC. If you don't know what DAC is, it's Digital Animation Center. They typically every year they go through and they create a studio and they write animation shorts, kind of like Pixar-ish kind of stuff, and they enter film festivals, and actually they do really well and tend to win. But this year, or last year, there's been a really strong interest in doing more game stuff. So they have a couple splinter groups that are doing games instead of animations, and they're teaming up with they're also teaming up with digital design. So in digital design, my counterpart is Brian Leister, and he teaches Unity to the digital design folks who do animation and do programming and some of that kind of stuff. So if there's 2 kind of really neat projects happening right now that we would love to join up with if you want to get involved with any of that. So I'll have them come in and do their elevator pitch and just do a demonstration and kind of where they're at. They started it last semester. I don't know where they're at right now. I haven't talked to them for a while, but we'll get in touch with them and we'll have them talk about what they're doing. It's pretty rad. Cool. All right. So I guess any other, like, before we dive into the content stuff, like any other like questions or issues with? Oh yeah, actually, with WWISE stuff. There's one other thing I wanted to hit on. Okay, cool. So feel free to interrupt anytime as we're going through all of this. But the one thing that I wanted to, a couple people hit me up about embedding images. So for the homework, how you actually turn this thing in. I'm going to screen share for a second. So with this one right here, if you want to embed image, actually let's just do it like, how do I add, so I just basically embedding my images into Canvas text submission. How do I embed images in here? And this is from whatever, New Mexico State. They have a quick little walkthrough right here. It's pretty good. And basically, I don't know if I can do it from my side because it won't let me because I'm a teacher. It doesn't look the same as yours. So if I do student view, but basically, typically what you're going to do, let's try it. Where is my assignments? So you basically go here, embed image, canvas, and I can't because I'm a teacher right here, but it would say upload file right here, and that's where you're going to upload a file. So just to be clear with this again, so when you're in your submission right here, what I'm asking you to do is I want you to take screenshots of your certification, the one that's like this thing right here. I want you to give me a picture, or you can do the overall picture, like the main page that shows all of the stuff that you've done. Basically, I want you to go through and I want you to show me that you do quiz 1, 2, 3, and 4 are done, and basically embed those in here. And so, but you do that as you over here say embed image.
Upload the file, Merkle. You just have to click on a folder for it to upload into when you go to the Canvas. So if you click on the My Files folder.
Oh, well, it still won't let me. Oh, it does let me actually, because I didn't know if a student view let me do that. I don't have any saved right now, so I can't really do it. Actually, what I can do is do this. Let's just save this image. Save it on my desktop. And then I'll go over here, upload Canvas files. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, this looks different when I'm in the instructor side of things. And then a screenshot, open. Cool. Update. And you could go through and just update and add one of those for each of those quizzes, and then submit the assignment. And just like with anything in Canvas, it's always a good idea to go back right here and hit submission details, because this is what I'm going to see. This is exactly what like if you want to see how I'm going to see it for grading, this is always a good thing to look at right here. Cool. Any questions on that? All right, cool. All right, cool. Let's get into what the next one. This next section is one of the ones I'm a little more rusty on, but it's one of the bigger and really important ones. So let's close this out. Close everything out. I'm gonna go to my canvas. I'm gonna go. Wait, yeah, I'm screen sharing. You guys are seeing my screen, right? Okay. Sorry, I'm moving quick here. So I got to get rid of all these other ones in here, but let's launch WWISE. So I've got a fresh version of this. So I'm going to say open selection. It's a new one, so I have to say yes. I want to update it to the newest version of it. There's a couple, like, for the most part, all the different generations of WWISE have been pretty similar, but there's a couple ones. If you went through this, if you've gone through lesson 3, they're like the filter things are a little bit different, and there's a few things here and there that are slightly different. Now, what we want to do is, so at this point, if we just kind of poke around, we see that we're back at our default state, like where we left off of number 2. And I'm going to put my chat up on my other screen. So if you have any questions, you can either type it in the chat or you just use your mic, because I can't see it very easily because I'm focusing on my screen right now. It's too many windows on the screen. Actually, same thing on move the people over there. Cool. Okay. So at this point, up till now, we've gotten pretty good at importing sounds and figuring out how to do more with less. And that's kind of the underlying theme continuing through this entire project and through the entire just game audio is how do you do more with less? And how do we make things dynamic? Because what we don't want to do is create 5,000 sound effects for every conceivable situation. And so what we do, but it makes more sense for us to do applying effects and dynamics and processing on the fly to a smaller set to create a really rich environment. So we're going to do that with using game syncs in this case. So game syncs are a huge part of game audio, and it's where we want to be able to have the game control certain audio parameters. So in this case, we're going to look at essentially 3 different kinds of things. And a big one that's very traditional one is when you're changing terrains. So in this case, we're going to have footsteps that are going to go between different terrains. So we want the footsteps to match what the visuals are doing. So when the way this is done is in Unity or Unreal or whatever you're using, you create these zones, so to speak, and they're like boxes. There's these collision detection things where you basically go into this zone, and when you go into this zone, it's going to send a game call over to WWISE, and with that, it's a specialized game one. So we saw these game calls before that we're doing. There were essentially triggers that were saying play, play, play. So we're doing the fire shotgun player, play. Well, this one, it's going to be sending stuff over things like footstep, 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 footstep. But also when it goes through a transition, so it's not only just doing the playing. When we go into a different area, it's gonna change to a different terrain, and the way we do that is with what's called switch states. And there's gonna be a lot of different things, like also like you do a switch state when you switch weapons. So it'll say which weapon is it. Like if you have fire shotgun player, it's gonna switch based off of what weapon you have chosen right there too. Or I don't know what else. Hit me up. What are some other things that, like, where we want something that switches to a different region or something? Like hit me up. What are some other ideas that this might be useful for?
Like atmosphere when you're changing, if the rain starts or like the weather changes or you go into a different realm.
Yeah. So yeah, and that one would probably fall under the RTPC kind of thing a little bit as the environment. So basically the background, the real-time parameter controls. So if you have a background noise, we can kind of, yeah, I guess that would be true. You're right. I guess we could do switch states. So some of these can be done multiple ways, but you're right. If the environment would change, so if you go from inside to outside, where you have birds chirping, and then you go inside and you want to have a reverberant like wooden hall sound that doesn't have the birds, you're going to switch the state there. And so that would probably be more of a RTPC, a real-time parameter control, because what you're going to do is you're going to crossfade between those so that when you walk into a switch state is going to be more of it's a hard change. So it's like it's like one or the other. And so
so like if let's say you're fighting a boss and at a certain health, the boss like transforms to a new like harder version and then his sounds change.
Yeah, if well, I mean that one could be also a state. So
Okay.
Yeah, so so that one is a state, and you can transition between states. So you have a boss version, and it goes like, from, as it goes through, it gets bigger and more monstrous as you kill it, and it gets more powerful or whatever it does. That one would probably be, I would use a switch state, or not switch, a state, because it would basically, you can transition between those states. But there's a lot of different ways you can do this, and so that's something to think about when you're going through these. That yes, we have different possibilities, but you may also, like you said, switch. So like for the big one, and the one we're going to focus on today, is just using it for terrain. And so it's basically when we walk around on different materials, how the footsteps change. So to do this, and it's a different kind of game call. So it's a little bit different. Like it's not going to say play wood and play wood and play wood and play concrete, play concrete, play concrete, play metal, play metal. It's just going to say play footstep, play footstep, play footstep, play footstep. And then we have this other controller outside of it that's basically telling it which one to play based off of which environment we're in. So we call that, and so this is in this special tab up here that we call game syncs. So game syncs are going to allow us to do these things. So we have essentially switch states, game parameters, and triggers. We're not really going to talk about triggers right now. We're going to focus on these three things right here today. So we're going to start with this first one called switches. And so if we want to think about how we're going to do the footsteps, we'll start with this one right here, and we want to create a switch state. And this one, just like the other stuff, like the event editor or event viewer down here, it's critical that you name these exactly the same, because this game call is coming from the game, and it has to be named exactly the same of what. So you have to agree with the programmer what this is going to be. And in this case, we're going to call this one materials, or material. And so with that, I don't like this. I don't like the name material, but that's what the programmer. This one's already baked into Cube, so we can't change it. So I would say I would call this footstep material or foot material or something like that if I was actually working with a game designer, because it's that one's a little vague, because materials it could be anything, but they're calling it material right here. So what this is right now is this is the actual game call that's coming from Cube or whatever game you're working with, and that's what we're gonna call. And then under here we also have to set up some different some switch states that we want this to be able to switch to. So and these are all going to be these are already predefined by the game. If it's a new game, this is something you're going to discuss with the programmer. So you'd create, if you've taken posts yet, this is like kind of like when you're doing a pre-production meeting or something, and you start out, you're going to do like a spotting session, or you're going to do a pre-production meeting and agree upon all these different parameters. And this I mean, as part of the soft skills, when you're working with a game programming team, this is like coming up with a communication method so that we all have the agreement of what's going to happen. You could do something in a Google Doc or something like that. I don't know if there's any standard way of doing this, but you need to make sure that everybody agrees, and you can figure out if something's screwed up by looking at the profiler. Like if you misspell something, it's easy. We're all human. We have a typo in there. If it's material instead of materials, or the other way around, it'll flash to and tell you that something's wrong, because you'll be walking through, you're like, why am I not hearing any footsteps? This is annoying, or they're not changing at least. And so that would indicate that. So, but you have to have really clear lines of communication there. So in this case, we need to come up with, and these are again already predefined in the game. So we want to go through it. I can say new child here and create a new switch, or I can just do it from the switch up here. So I'm just going to hit here, switch, and so I'm going to start with concrete. And as I mentioned before, these are not case sensitive. You can they get pushed down into, everything gets pushed down into lowercase, but I'm just going to copy exactly what they had. So we're going to have a concrete one. So that's one switch state. Then we're going to do, what do we have? Grass. They have a shortcut for that. So like you're saying, Sean, I don't know what the shortcut for this one is, so I have to basically click it every time, which is really annoying. I hate mousing. Some metal. Stone. And like I said, I am not making these up. These are from this is what's built into the game already. Water and wood. Cool. I think that's right. Yeah, that's all I've got. Cool. So now we've got now we've got the set up so that it's going to be listening from the game, and it will depending on where I'm at in the game, it'll switch between any one of these. And we'll take a look at this at the end. You can watch it switch between those, and then even cooler when we get into actually doing Unity or Unreal, we'll look at how to program these in. It's kind of neat. It's pretty tedious because basically there's like every time you switch a terrain, you have to have like an indicator that's in there. A lot of game programming is very tedious. so over here now we need to start attaching some sounds to play with that. So all it's doing right now is saying I'm switching between these states. And now we need to say I want to add some sort of an effect, like because it doesn't know that it's attached to any kind of footsteps or anything like that. So what we need to now do is create what we want to have that's affected by these switch states. In this case, it's going to be footsteps. So let's go in, and we need to import some audio files. This is where so Shift-I, the import. And in this case, we're going to do an add audio folder. Like before when we were doing the shells, we're going to add a folder. So like when we did the shotgun shells, we imported those, and we put those into random containers. We're going to do this one a little bit different. When I hit select on the footsteps right here, let's say select folder. Before when we did the shotgun shells right here, what we did is we said select this into a random container. But what we don't want to do, we don't want to do a random and a random. Actually, I mean you can do that, which is kind of neat. So if you had something where you had a random container can trigger a random container, which has random sounds inside of it. So if you wanted to have doubly random, I don't know if that would make any really big difference, but you know, it maybe for some sort of complex organization, if you wanted to like have like these random magical spells here that have these different things, but like instead of having one gigantic pool of them, you can break them up into smaller random containers if you wanted to do something like that. But by default, it's going to do this virtual folder. Now, virtual folders, as I kind of mentioned before, are essentially just an organizational tool. They're just a folder, but they're not an actual folder. Like, so if you were to go back into the actual session itself, like in the folders, it's not putting it inside a folder. It's just for our sake, so for an organization. And as you get more and more sounds, having those virtual folders is really useful because things get really like, I mean, you can imagine we're only allowed with the free version here to do like 200 or 500 sounds, but you can easily get up into thousands of sounds. And a big part of game audio is management, especially because everything needs to be named correctly. So if you think about the string of events, you're in your DAW working this thing out. Say I'm creating footsteps right here, and I go through and I create a footstep session, and that's actually how I would probably do it. And if you're using Reaper, this is really easy to do. So you'd have a footstep session, you'd have a weapon session, you'd have a monster session, you have a music session, and you can actually toggle back and forth between all those sessions. That's one of the cool things about Reaper is that you can quickly toggle back for these. Now the problem is like every time naming conventions is critical. So if I export this, what I don't want to do, if I have 500 footsteps of sounds, that I export those and then I have to go back and rename those in my Finder or in my Windows Explorer. So you have to be really careful that everything is named in the correct way so that it propagates all the way through. So this one, it's going to be our footsteps here, and we want to change this to a switch container in this case. So when I say switch container, what it's going to do, it still keeps these as randoms, which is cool. It doesn't have to. If you wanted to turn these into sequence containers, you could. For some reason, if you wanted to, I'm trying to think of a situation, but you may want to turn these into sequences for something, or you could turn those into virtual folders or something along those lines. But basically, in this case, it's saying the parent is going to be a footsteps, and then it's going to randomly pull from the concrete, dirt, gravel, and these are the only ones that I have. Switch container, and you'll notice that this doesn't quite match up with as many different things. So as I'm importing this, I only have concrete, dirt, gravel, and tile. I'm missing a bunch of stuff like grass, sand, water, metal. Wait, no, I don't have metal in there either. So we're gonna have to do some tweaking, but this will at least get us off a good start. And the tedious part is going to be going and finding these things out of your library. So you have to go through and find footsteps. And what you'll quickly find is that your footsteps for, say, concrete and your footsteps for dirt don't sound like the same kind of footwear or same weight of a person or the same microphone. It has a different timbre. So I would strongly recommend that you start recording your own Foley and your own footsteps. And so I'm going to do a lecture on Foley recording and how to do this next week, I believe. Maybe. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's the week after. So I'm going to go through and do a session, because what you're going to be doing is your job is going to be go through and redo this entire game with your own sounds. I mean, you can use library sounds if you want, but you can't use any of the sounds that came with the WWISE tutorials. So your job is going to have to be create all your own sounds here and go through the entire process. And the cooler way is to go through and actually record your own. And in Studio F on campus, we have Foley pits. And so I'm going to go do it. I'll do a video tutorial, and I'm going to be doing it from F on how to do the Foley stuff. And it makes a way big difference. So I'm going to hit import. Cool. It imports my footsteps right here, and we can see that we have our concrete, dirt, gravel, tile. If I wanted to, with our general settings here, we could go through, we could do stuff like the shuffle random, like standard. So if I don't want the same footstep to be played at once, if you use one footstep, it sounds really, really, really weird. And so if you could go, if you wanted to, you could also go through and randomize the volume a bit and randomize the pitch just a little bit. If you're going to randomize the pitch on footsteps, do it just a few cents. But it might be worth it to add a little variation on there. I don't know if I can do, well, let me do multiples at once. Let me bump this up. No, it didn't take. That's annoying. So unfortunately, when you create it with doing the automated way, it doesn't take, you have to go through, and any changes you want to make to the general settings here, you have to do it. You can't copy and paste your settings from one to the other. So that's kind of a pain in the ass. You know, it's tedious, but that's the way it goes. Okay, so now we have our footsteps here, and we have our game sync. We have our footsteps here, and we have our game syncs over here. We need to connect those two together. Well, actually, we'll say when I say game syncs, I mean switches in this case. So we need to connect some way for our footsteps to our switch. And so if we look in our general settings right here on footsteps, we have a switch group right here. So I'm going to click on the group, the switch groups, and I'm going to say, and in this case, I'm going to hit material because that's the one. It's the one that I created in the other one over there. But I also have the ability, if I wanted to create a new one. So the way I did is I created the switch groups, and then I brought in the footsteps and attaching it to the materials. I could have gone through and created all the footsteps and then make the material, the switch container to go with this, not switch container, switch game sync to go with this by sitting here saying new. But this one's already created for us, so I'm gonna hit material. And what that did is now we're attaching this, and this is now the game sync is now attached to this and is listening to it. And it will respond to whatever the game is telling it to do. So when it's doing it, we still don't have some play stuff set up quite yet, but it still was saying that at least this is the material is now connected to the footsteps. And another important thing is that sometimes if something gets screwed up, maybe the game audio, the programmer forgot to put a footsteps, or maybe you're in a zone, like you'll see when we get into Unity, and you have a complex world. Doing switches can be really difficult, like hitting every single possible terrain. There's other tricks that the advanced programmers know how to do this better than I, but that when they create the terrain, it automatically creates a switch state. But for most of the stuff that we're going to be doing, we have to create these like collision boxes that manually switch it, so that when I go into the water or when I go into the dirt, it switches it. But it may be that you forgot or you missed it. So we need to have it go back to a default state. In this case, we're going to do so we have to choose what do we want as the default. So if something goes wrong, what does it fall back to? So at least it will play something. Even if it's wrong, at least it's going to play something, because what we don't want to have happen is no footsteps, because that would be the worst, is if you're just floating, right? Like we need to immerse the player into this. So in this case, I'm going to choose concrete, just because the concrete will be just the default one there. And I'm going to make this a little bigger. Expand this out a little bit. Actually, let's listen to some footsteps. Turn off the original. Footsteps. Oh. Are you hearing it? Okay, cool. I don't like that one. Tile's annoying. It's got a little squeak to it. It also has some room reverb to it. I don't like the reverb. It's too wet. And it's only got 4 of them in there. It's got that little squeak in there. So when you're running around, you're going to hear that little squeak come through at least, every once in a while, which is kind of annoying. So I would say I don't like that one very much, but whatever. I'm just going to leave it because I don't have time to go through and do this. Like what I would probably do is go through and create a whole bunch of these, and then you just turn off which ones you think don't actually fit in the session. But we're going to leave this one for right now. Okay. So now what we have is we have our footsteps, and we have it's attached to this the switch group, and we have a default state. Now what we need to do is we need to tell it what we want it to play. So in this case over here we have our assigned object. So what it says, I want to when I want to play footsteps and I'm in concrete, well, it would make sense for us to do the concrete over here into concrete. And now the weird one is going to be like, okay, well, we don't have a grass one. So these are all the ones that are coming from, and you can figure what these are out by looking at the game profile or when you're playing when you're playing Cube. You could go through and ping these, but they gave it to us already, and it'd be better if it came from the programmer, but you can also just go through your profile and figure this out. Now we have grass, but I haven't yet created a grass one here. So what am I going to do? Well, I guess I could just use dirt if I wanted to. It's kind of annoying, but you can actually also add like tile at the same time. So if I wanted to, I can create a blend between two. So I can actually add multiples in there at the same time. I'm going to get this one out of there. But you can add multiple sounds into there. So if you wanted to create some really complex ones, you could come up with a very huge list of stuff over here as random containers, and then you could attach those to different blending and different combinations of those in there to give it that more realistic and more variation sounds. But in this case, we have grass, so we have gravel. In this case, I do have a gravel one over here. So let's grab gravel into gravel. I don't have a metal, so if I'm a metal, maybe this is just as a placeholder, because I'm like, I haven't had time to go through and create that fully. And maybe when you're working with your producer or your team, you're like, well, at least I want to throw some placeholders in there so we can get the game up and running and playing, just so we can hear it. And maybe we're working on dialogue for a while, and we're like, I need to have voice, I need to at least get something in there right now. So I will just throw some placeholders in there. And I haven't done metal. I haven't done a deep search for that yet. And once the timbre of the game starts to develop, or you haven't recorded your own Foley session yet, because you're like, well, if I'm going to go through do a whole Foley session, I want to make sure I have all the things I need, so I'm not doing 10 different Foley sessions. So maybe you'll just throw placeholders in there in the meantime. And so in this case, for metal, I'm like, well, tile might be close enough. It doesn't have the ping that we need, but maybe that might work well enough for us. So for sand, well, that probably is going to, I could probably do that one with gravel. Stone, I'm going to use tile. Well, actually, I'll probably use concrete for that one. Tile, we have that one. Water, we don't have anything that sounds like water. So we're just going to have to guess on that one. And we're like, well, let's just go back to dirt for that for right now. It's going to be weird, so if you step in water, it's going to make a dirt sound, but good enough for now. And then wood. Well, wood, I guess we could do tile. I don't know. I don't like that. We'd probably go through. Let me listen to those. I'm gonna do concrete for the wood one instead. And I mean, you could double them up if you really wanted to. Cool. So now what's going to happen is we have footsteps that are over here that are now attached to the switch states. And if we want to hear those, how those work, if we go down over here in our transport, pull that up to the middle of the screen a little bit. In our switch state down, in our transport down here with footsteps selected right here, and I'm going to pin this right now. So if you hit the pin right here, and basically now if I select any other sounds, it stays on the footsteps. So no matter what I do, and I'm hitting the space bar. So if I go and I hit shotgun pump out, it's going to stay pinned on the footsteps. And this is really useful if you're mucking around with a bunch of settings and you want it to stay on a certain thing. So in this case, I'm going to leave it on here. I could go back and switch it here, and that's fine. But now if we look at, we have states, RTPCs, switches, and triggers. And so these are, if you remember, these are in our gain sinks. We have our switches, states, game. So game parameters is game parameters is RTPCs. So it's real-time parameter control, or what we call game parameters. So this one's called a little something different. Then we have switches over here, up here. So if I go to switches, we can see that our material now shows up in as a possibility right here. So if I hit play, this one's annoying. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make it sound like I'm running. So I'm hitting spacebar quickly, but it's not working very well. So it's not triggering it quick enough, because what it won't do is it won't trigger again until it's done playing. So we'll look at how we do that with the simulator later when we actually hook it up with the MIDI controllers. So I have a MIDI fighter that I use, and a MIDI fighter twister that I use for this. So you can actually trigger sound, so you can make it sound like you're running. So you can just like you would with a drum machine, you can pound on that thing to actually trigger it really quickly and make it sound like it's actually working. But this is a pretty good simulation right now. So where you can see that we're on concrete, and if I want to switch to it, I can go, okay, this is what grass is going to sound like. Stone. Stone should probably be tile. Let me go back and change that. Put tile on that one for stone. Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I guess I would have to see what the terrain looks like in the game, but maybe that doesn't make sense. And then metal. tile. So water sounds pretty good. Maybe if you wanted to, if you're like, oh, that's all I have to work with, maybe I could pitch that one down a little bit. Like pitch the tile one or the audio. If I go to, well, no, that's actually not a good idea because that one is being used for other stuff. Cool. And what we can go back to is if I hit reset all, you'll see that it goes back to concrete. So it sets it back to its default state. And that's a good thing to check because this is what, when I say reset all, if nothing is defined by the game, this is what they're going to end up hearing right there. Cool. All right. So now at this point we have our game sync and we have our audio triggering, but what we don't have is we don't have an event to actually trigger this thing. So there's nothing to actually trigger this event. So we need to create an event for this. And what are we going to call it? Foot player. So again, this is predefined by the thing. We'll say new play. You can just say empty event and add a play, but I'm just going to say new play. I'm going to call it foot player. And it's saying, hey, it's cool. That's cool that you made a foot player, but there's no target that's going to be targeted with this. So I'm going to add footsteps in there. I'm going to unpin my transport down here. And now every time that the game says, so the game's sending two different kind of things. It's going to be sending an event trigger for saying play footstep, play footstep, play footstep, play footstep. And then when I switch to a different region in the lane level, it's going to switch over to the different and tell it which of these random containers to be playing right there. So that is, in a nutshell, working with some of the initial game syncs with switch states. Is there any questions on that? That making sense? Cool. So when you're in the weeds and you're in the actual thick of it, it's going to get a little more complicated, but it makes sense, from a conceptual level. Okay, cool. All right, moving on. So now we want to do let's look at some other other real-time game parameters. So when we want to change something, like Sean was kind of mentioning at the beginning, there's looking at when things change in the environment. So when we want to change something like, say, the RPM of an engine. So we want to be if we're doing a racing game and we're cruising along and the RPM of the engine we're revving up, if we're accelerating, generally what you want to be doing is you want to have the either the pitch going up or the repeating moving faster because we go so, and if we're decelerating, ew. Or maybe you have something like time of day. So based on the time of day, we will have different things like different crickets playing. If you're at night and you want to have but during the day, maybe you have an owl hooting every once in a while or something like that. And then during the day, you're going to have birds and maybe a little wind rustling or something like that. Or if you're in some sort of village, you're going to hear people in the pub at night playing music and drinking and singing, whereas during the day it's going to be not there. So we can use this basically it's a range. So unlike the switch state was a hard separation between different states, RTPCs are going to be a blend between different things. So depending on so it could be time of day, it could be RPM, it could be health, it could be all these kind of different things. So these are all these gradient ones. And so that's what we want to set up is this gradient. So in this case, we're going to do it with player health. And so this has already been baked into Cube. And so we have a thing called player health that they're going to allow us to attach our stuff to. I'm going to keep an eye on my time here. Okay, so this is another kind of specialized game call, and so we're going to go into our parameters over here, and let me make sure I'm doing this in the right direction. Yep. So what I'm going to do is create in this one right here, this game parameter, I'm going to create a new child, which is going to be a game parameter, or I could hit it up here. So it's this. That's what the symbol for game parameter is. Hit game parameter right here, and it's going to be called player health. And once again, this is crazy important that you get this to be named the same thing that's coming from the game. This stuff can be named whatever you want it. The game syncs, this has to all be named exactly the same thing. So on player health right here, let's take a look at what we've got. The inspector over here or property editor is pretty boring for a lot of these things over here. Even for our states, we don't have a lot going on over here, but that's because most of the action for these parameter controllers are controlling it in some other place. So in here we have player health in this case, but we do have to look at this. So maybe it's range. So in other words, we could say it's a distance to something. I hesitate to use the word distance because when we get to a number like lesson 4, when we talk about how we get closer and farther to things, we use attenuation controls for when we want to do distance. So, but when we talk about what the range is, and this is going to be defined by the game. So the game could be anywhere between, you know, like 1 and 1,000 for something if it needs to have more granular control. But in this case, a lot of times we think about player health. And so this is player health. We think about it as 100% to 0. So the minimum is 0, max is 100. And the default is, what does it happen when we invoke this for the first time? Well, we don't want our health to start at 50. We want our health to start at 100. And this should be defined by the game programmer. It should come in when the level starts. It should go, hey, the player's at 100 health. But it may be that they only until you get hit that it notifies WWISE that your health has actually been degraded. So you need to set your own default values in there. So that's really important. They hit the default value right there, so that it basically when the game starts, it's going to start it at, or whatever, when the level starts, it's going to start it at 100, and then it could be overridden by the parameter coming from the game. But that's good enough for us right now. Cool. So I'm going to Control S. Now we need to attach. So just like what we did when we set this up over here, we need to attach it to something. So this is the very first thing that's kind of basic to start out with. So the first thing we want to do is attach it to a sound, and we don't have a heartbeat in this case. So health oftentimes in games is going to be associated with what would be a heartbeat. What we want to do is when we're running around and we're getting hit, like as we go and our health is going down, it's distracting for us to look away and find out what our health is. Usually, it's going to be some sort of a bar or red bar or some sort of number indicator somewhere in there. But what we want to do is, if the action is really intense, one of the cool things that we, as humans, is we can use our ears as a secondary input source. So we can look at something and we can be focusing on fighting a boss, and we can figure out how our health is doing without having to take our eyes off the action in front. And so we can use oral cues, A-U-A-R-A-L, oral cues to help us indicate and also add some intensity to the game. So as your health is declining, we want the intensity to go up. So you could have something like the music changing, or you could do the same thing if the boss's health is degrading, that the music is intensifying or doing something changing in the game. But for us, we want our heartbeat to increase, and that's kind of a classic kind of a thing that you can tell, things are in trouble. Maybe your breathing changes or something, like basically the intensity of the game goes up. And so we're going to use our heartbeat for this one. So let's add a heartbeat in here. And I'm just going to do Shift-I to import it. Add file. Lesson 3, audio files, heartbeat. This is just the WWISE 101 lesson files. Open it up, bring it in. It's going to attach it to a sound effects object, which is just fine. And we have our, where did it go? Let me close all this out. There's my heartbeat. Cool. Now, let's just listen to it for a second. So the way this works, and this happens a lot, is that what we want to have happen is that when the level gets loaded, it's going to start playing the heartbeat. So in other words, the heartbeat plays through the entire level all the time, but we don't actually hear it. So what we want to do is, as our health degrades, we want to fade in the heartbeat sound. So in fact, if we want to just take a look at it, this is the heartbeat sound right here. Cool. So it's like, how long is this thing? Looks like it's about 31 seconds long or something like that. That's actually really poor resource management. Anytime you see anything redundant, you should be getting rid of it. So basically, we could trim this one down into 1 or 2 of these and remove a lot of this heartbeat. We can see that there is variation between this, but if I go over to here, can you hear the difference between the heartbeats? They change a little bit, but it's pretty subtle. So subtle enough that I don't think it's worth the data. So I would actually trim this thing way down to something like that. And let's listen to that. Well, let me zoom in on that. You can do Control and what is it? So if I do Control Shift, I can zoom in. You can also do it down here, but there's the Control Shift to zoom in on the thing. And I want to get that right up next to that one right here. And if I were to loop this now, well, if I turn loop on, let's get out of here for a second. I'm going to turn loop on. That works. So, but in doing, by looping that and trimming it down, I just saved myself a ton of data and a ton of space in the game. And when I say a ton, it doesn't seem like a ton, but every bit counts. So you're always looking for redundancies. How can I squeeze this down? How can I squeeze this down? That's one way to do it. Okay. Now we've got, so what's going to happen is this is going to be playing all the time when the game is actually running, but we're only going to fade it in when my health gets, like when I'm getting it hurt. So we're going to go over to our RTPCs right here, and we have the ability now to start attaching this. So in the RTPCs, we have the ability to attach this to the game sync. So under our arrow here, what I want to do is I want to say voice volume. So voice volume is on the y-axis. So this is the y-axis right here, and this is going to be attached to the game parameters that we created. So default one, and I created this one called player health. I could also create a new one, but I'm going to go to player health. So now our player health, so that player health is just the sync, the game sync call coming from Cube. That basically it's going to be moving this thing around right here. So if my if I'm here, and so I can simulate this. So this is where my health is 100, and this is where my health is 0. What's wrong with this picture?
It's backwards.
It's backwards, right? We want it to be like when the health gets bad, that it fades in. So what we want to do is we want to flip this around. And so this is a weird voice volume. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's given in decibels, but it's kind of, well, I don't know. It's just it's a weird scale. But effectively, minus 200 is silent. 0 means it's at unity. It's not boosting it. We have the ability to boost the volume if we wanted to. So it'd be weird to do that, but like if you wanted to boost the volume above 0, you could. So I'm gonna put this one at 0, and I'm gonna drag this one down to 100. And so now, if my health is at 100, I don't hear anything. And as my health goes down, that's good. But you know, even if I'm at 70% health, that seems pretty loud. 70% health isn't really like critical. So we actually only want to hear this on the lower end. So what I can do is I can double click on this, and I can add a point. So I'm going to make this so that only below 50 health of 50 does it actually start kicking in. So if my health is above 50, we're not going to hear the heartbeat, but it's only when we start getting here. We want to only hear that when it starts getting critical. So that's when it's going to start fading in around there. And you can experiment with this sort of thing, like to figure out what you think is probably appropriate. And you can go back and retune it as you needed. But I also think that, like, maybe that's good. Maybe it's good enough. But we have the ability to change the curve right here. So if I right click on the curve, we can change it to be whatever we want. So I kind of like this one right here. They like the exponential one. I think this one's pretty nice. Cool. So now what ends up happening is as the player is moving around, as they get health, the game when it deems that it's important, maybe you took a hit, it's going to knock you down. When you take a hit, it's going to knock you down. When you take a hit, it's going to knock you down, and it's going to send it between a parameter control between 0 and 100, and it's going to tell you what your like player life or player health 50, player health 30, player health 20, and it's going to adjust this for us and move this to where it needs to be. But what we can also do, and another huge aspect of perception, like the perceptual stuff, one of the things that we automate a lot in the game world is going to be a low pass and high pass filtering. Low pass filtering is going to be a big one. So what we want to do is we want to actually add a low pass filter in here, so that basically, if you want something to sound like it's like not less noticeable, rolling off the high frequencies is a very good idea, and especially in the heat of battle and dialogue. Not having a lot of high frequency in there is going to make it so it's like you can hear it, but it's not getting in the way of the game. But then, you know, in typical mixing, you know, same thing with vocals or a hi-hat or, you know, any kind of mixing, traditional mixing environment. What we want to do is we want to add another parameter into this thing right here. So based off of this, so we could add voice volume, but we also want to add the low pass filter, voice low pass filter. So attaching this voice low pass filter, we could also, in this case, we're going to attach it also to player health. If the game designer wanted to add a different parameter in there, we could, but we're going to attach this to the same player health right here. Now, the weird thing is with this is the low pass filters, this one has a range of 100 to minus 100. And it's kind of strange. It's hard to think about this, but 100 means it's not, there's no low pass filtering at all, and 0 means it's all low pass filtered. So if you think about the low pass filtering, it's on a range between 0 and 100, and it's hard to think about that. So in other words, if I put this at 50%, what does that 50% mean? Is that 10 kilohertz or what? So if you're looking in there is in the help file, it talks about this. This is what the cutoff frequency is for the low pass filter, and this is the high pass filter. So you can look at it. The high pass and low pass are inverses of one another. So if I have a low pass filter of 100, that means it's going to be complete. I'm sorry, I guess I had it backwards when I said 100 means it's completely cut off, and a 0 means 0 cut off. That's hard for me to think about. So once again, a 0 means there's no low pass filtering. 100% means it's 100% low pass filtered. That's a weird way for us as audio people to think about filtering, but that's just the way that they've attached this, and people have gotten used to it over time. I don't love it. So that means right now, this is like at 100. When I move this up to 100, let's get that out of the way. That it's completely high pass filtered, and as I go with this way, it's sweeping the filter up. Even though the number is going down, the filter is going up. Does that make sense? It's weird. So what we want to do now is, since like it's quiet, like in fact, if I listen to it right now, that means there's no low pass filtering. So what I'm going to do is, because the volume is being reduced here, and in fact, if I want to see both of these at the same time, I can select on, if I hit Shift or Control, if I have lots of stuff going on here, I can hit Control and select just a few. If I hit Shift, I can select multiples here. So now I can see relative to each other at the same time what's happening here. So we can see that it's going to be fading out right here, but even though the low pass filter isn't engaging, it's already gone, so we can't really hear it. So what we want to do is we want to add another point right here so that we can actually hear the high pass filter engage. So it's a subtle effect, but it works. So what's happening is as I basically get hurt more, the low pass filter is sweeping up and the volume is coming up. It's kind of like, you can think about like, I mean, you can think about it like automation, but it's not. It's just real-time controls, and that's one of the big differentiators between, a linear media system and something like this. We're programming it in to do our automation, our on-the-call automation or controls for us. All right, I got to pick up the pace here. Might want to move this around. Let's see if we can, so we can hear it more. So because this filter sweeps up so much that it actually takes out all the amplitude. So we might want to swoop this up to here, and you can adjust, tweak it to get it to where you like it. Cool. Let me see where I'm at on my stuff. Yeah. Okay. The last thing I'm going to look at here, just real quick, is if I look at down on my transport down here, and I'm still on heartbeat. I want to hear my heartbeat right here. We can also hit RTPCs right here, and I can adjust it right here as well. So we can, even if I'm off of this page right here, so if I'm looking over at, say, general settings right here, I can still control my simulator right here. And if I hit default, reset all, it goes back to 100. And the reason it went back to 100 was because it was in my game syncs right here in my player health. This default was set to 100. So when I hit reset all, this is going to go to 100 right here. So this is kind of like our controller, like our simulator down here that allows us to simulate stuff. And so this is with our heartbeat right there. So that is how we're going to basically control the heartbeat stuff. Any questions on that? Billy, you're like, I know I'm feeding you with the fire hose, but you guys have, this is just secondary reference. What do you think? Is it making sense? Sure, because I'm just doing it. It's when you're thrown in the deep end yourself, you're like, oh man, this is so hard. It is, but when you go through this a few times, it'll start. Every time you go through it, you learn a little something more. It gets a little bit easier and a little bit easier. This is like the equivalent of like trying to learn whatever Photoshop. If you've never used Photoshop before, we're gonna learn Photoshop in 2 weeks. That's pretty much what we're doing here. You know, this is a complex piece of software, and I get it. Like this is it's frustrating because you're like, dude, I spent this entire time in the audio program learning, crafting my skills with sound design. When I say sound design, I mean say musical sound design, producing music, and getting good with my DAW. Like this is just another like a whole extra like big step up in DAWs. So you have to know all the other stuff, and this is what separates the rookies from the pros. The rookies are just going to have good DAW experience. They're going to be make really good sound effects and really good compositions, but they don't know how to implement them. This is what's going to separate the pros here, because this is what gives you creative control. So and the term for this back in the day is what we used to say was called throwing it over the wall. Back in the old days, the sound designers and composers would go through and they would create sound effects, create stuff, and we call it throwing it over the wall, give it to the audio programmers, and they would drop it and implement it into the game, and we had no control over it. And so we were just at the whim of how the sound was implemented in the game. But now we have control over all of this, and now we can create much, much bigger, immersive, and just better soundscapes. So that's what that are more reactive, and that because honestly, all the experience that we have with doing our music stuff and all of our mixing and our mastering and our EQ and compression skills, those skills are not usually held by the programmers. So for us to ask them to add compression or ducking or something to something, they might know what the word means, but they may not be. I mean, if you're lucky and you're on a team that has a really good audio person on the team, they know what you mean. But the truth is, we would rather have control of that, because if we want the mixes to sound good, we're the ones who know how to mix this stuff. So that's what this software does, is gives us the control for this with all this. But it's hard, and I get it, but this is what really is going to set you above. And this is why I'm guessing on almost all of the like job descriptions we were looking at, they have WWISE listed, because this is what you need to do to create good mixes. All right, let's take a look at one more last step. So it's 10:30. I've got 15 minutes. Let's look at one last thing here. I'm going to talk about using states. So states are when you want to do a sweeping change of the entire game. Well, it doesn't have to be the entire game, but of a lot of different elements. So in other words, I want to say it's going to be black or white, you know, like switching between two different states. And it could be like they give the example in the book, something like you get stunned by a grenade, right? So like a grenade comes in, a frag hits it, and it blows up, and everything goes like kind of fuzzy and blurry maybe in the visuals, but we want to have the sound match that, and maybe add a high-pitched sound to it, and you also want to have it recover slowly. So like maybe it takes like 20 seconds for you to recover from getting hit by a nearby grenade, that as you come back, you want it to fade back into your normal state. So, or if you go underwater, underwater would be probably I guess underwater, a state would be underwater. So if you go underwater, you want it to switch to something with a lot of low pass filtering, and so it sounds all warbled and odd. But then when you come back above water, you want to switch back to another state. In this case, what we're going to do is when you die, you shouldn't have a heartbeat anymore, because what we saw is as we go down and down and down and down on our health. Once you get to health 0, your heartbeat is going all the way. But then as the monsters kill you, it wouldn't be right to have a heartbeat in there anymore. So what we need to do is we actually need to fade out. We need to get the heartbeat to go away. But rather than just having it stop, we want to add a little bit of like something to it. Add a little bit of mojo to this thing so that it fades away. So as you die and fade, we want the sound to fade away. And then maybe if you respawn, if you're playing like a multiplayer game or like something where you can spawn back in, maybe you have it actually fade away really quickly because you're going to spawn back in. And in fact, if you spawn immediately, then, well, usually you don't spawn immediately. You'll have you want that transition to fade away to death, and then you respawn back in, and then you switch the state back to alive again. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to look at our states up here. Make sure I'm going to go in the right order here. Yep. So once again, on our default work unit right here. So in a larger game, you would not be using default working unit. Maybe your states are going to be attached to like players. That you might have a player control right here. You may have a weapons. You may have different like work units for different. If you're on a large team, if you're on a small independent team, you can just use everything in default working units. Although I would probably, if it were me, I would still break those apart into smaller into smaller units just because for organization reasons. But this is such a small game, we don't need to do that. So in this one right here, I'm going to create a switch state. So we're going to call this one player life. And once again, this is going to come from the game. So the player life is being determined by cube. And we're going to add a couple different states in here. So we're going to do alive. And we're going to do dead.
Where can we find like all of the pre-made like cube parameters? Like, is there a list like listed and like on a website or something?
There's not, but I used to so the way I used to do it is I would go through the profiler and just watch all the profiling stuff. But there's stuff that isn't in the profile that shows up. So Brock sent me an Excel spreadsheet of everything. So I'm going to give that to you guys. I'll post it. And so we have a list of everything. Yeah, it has a list of everything in there. I haven't even looked at it. I just actually emailed him right before the semester started. I was like, hey, dude, I know you mentioned that you have an Excel spreadsheet. And he sent it to me like right after, but I haven't even checked it out yet. So,
cool.
But he said it was pretty badass.
Thank you.
Sure thing. So now we have two different states right here, alive and dead. And so we can have more states in here as well. But so we could create a complex. So like if you want to have, I'm trying to think, like maybe you're stunned, like in a stunned magical spell state or something like that, where it stuns you, then you go to a transition state, and then you go back to full alive. You can create like a staged thing here. So default transition time is always gonna be 1 second. So, but we can override that if we wanted to. So I'm gonna do an insert here. I'm gonna go from alive to dead. In this case, I want that to go over the course of 5 seconds. So actually, I don't even know what that one is. So it's bidirectional. So if you go alive to dead and dead to alive, it'll do this transition in 5 seconds right here. So that's, let me see. Sorry, I need to be looking. Okay. So what we want to have happen here is, sorry. What we want to have happen here is that when I go from alive to dead, it's going to take like 5 seconds. But what do we want to change? So when we go from alive to dead, we have to assign it's like what's going to change between those two things. So I'm going to go back to my audio and we look at my heartbeat again. And over here we have states. We have a states tab up top, and I want to add a state group in here. And because I created already one over there. If I created a new one, it would create one, and I have the ability to create it, and then I can adjust it over in GameSyncs. But I created it in GameSyncs first. In this case, I'm gonna create a heartbeat and it states. I'm gonna add state group player life. So with player life, we have the ability these are the things that we're gonna say. So when I'm alive, I want voice volume, pitch, low pass filter, high pass filter, and makeup gain to all be the same, be at unity. Meaning these are offset values from the actual values that it's doing. So when you're playing the actual game, I want it to be these are relative. So yeah, it gets a little more complicated when we talk about things like the water or magical spell stuff. But when we go to dead, what we want to have happen is we want the thing to completely fade away. So what I can do is I can make this fade to -96. So I want it to fade to -96, and I mean, I already have the low. At this point, the low pass filter is all the way open with 0. But what I can do is I want to change that to all the way to 100. So it's going to fade out and go. So it's basically the opposite of what we did with player health. It's going to go the other direction right there. In fact, we can actually look at both of those at the same time over here. If I hit this tab right here, we can see both of those happen. Like what's going to happen like at the same time. But I'm going to go back to just a single one right here. So basically it's going to, and it's over the course of 5 seconds, it's going to go from -96 to 100. So I'm going to save. And if we want to hear this thing happening, where are we at? 1038. Let me see. If we want to hear how this thing is working. So right now my player health is 100. And if I press play, we're not going to hear anything because my health is at 100. I'm going to turn this on right here. You can look at this from a split window or up top bottom. And
oh, that's huge.
Yeah. So you can actually see what's going on there. So as my player health is going down here, so at the very bottom here, technically I'm dead now. So if we said, okay, well, at like 1, this is where I'm at 1. But even if I could still have player health 0, I'm technically alive until the game itself sends out the signal, hey, the player's dead. The WWISE doesn't know whether I'm alive or dead. There's no logic in WWISE for that sort of thing. So WWISE, the logic has to come from the game, say, hey, the player just died. So what it does, it's going to send out a player state, player health. It's going to, well, actually the state is called player life. It'll say player life, dead. So right now it's at none. Actually, if I hit reset all, and we want to go alive. So actually, I wonder, it doesn't give us the default value, which is kind of strange, but that's okay. That right now we're alive, and I'm going to go back to my RTPC. I can control it from here too, but I think it's better to look at it here. Play. So we're alive right now. We're still technically alive, but we just died. So with player health at 0 and we die, we want to go from player life alive to dead. And I'm going to be quiet so you can hear the transition. Cool.
Oh, cool.
So it's kind of hard to hear it, but the high pass filter kicked in and it faded out. And then if I bring it back to alive, because there's no transition to go from dead to alive, it's instantaneous.
So like, what if you had like some sort of like scenario music, like orchestral strings or just like a brass or something like that? Like that happens when you do die officially.
So then,
like,
is
this where you would do that, or would you make separate?
I would do a play event. So basically,
Gotcha.
They would have to send out an event play, or event trigger. Like over here, you'd have to say, like something that triggers it to say I'm dead, or sorry, like I died right here. Right now, what we're doing is we're just controlling it. So actually, I don't know if you could lock on to that orchestral drop or whatever it was you want to call it. That basically that would lock onto that event right there, because that event, well, right now that's a state change. That's not because when you're in Unity, you can assign states, and so you'd have to say like upon player health hitting 0 or whatever, when player dies, player dead, and so you'd have an event over here called player death or something like that, and that would trigger a sound to do the player death, not from a state change. But good question. Cool.
Thank you.
All right, so we're probably not going to have not quite enough time to get into every single thing that we want to do here. But, well, okay, so the other thing we want to be able to do is monitor this thing in real life. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up Cube. I'm going to move it over to the side a little bit so we can kind of both things go at the same time. And what we want to look at now is our profiler. So if we go to our profiler right here, we can actually watch. Actually, I want to do the view profiler, voice inspector, not that one. What was it? Which one was it doing? We can look at. I want to look at layouts, voice player. Oh, layouts, voice.
So I know in Cube, like in the demo, they make it so there is like a non-pressure environment, so you can practice and like listen to the sound.
Yeah.
Is there anything? How would you go about like triggering like your death, let's say in Cube? Is that a possibility, or would you have to, like spawn an enemy? Or
no, what you do is go get the rocket launcher and just shoot down, and it'll blow you up. Okay. Or stand next to a wall and it'll blow you up.
Gotcha.
So in here we can look at the voice profiler. So this is under layouts, voice profiler right here, and we can actually look what's happened. We'll see in a later one. It gets a little bit tricky. Things get a little funky. What we want to do is we want to watch what's happening coming from Cube here. Let's see, but what we need to do is, this is a weird one. So it's under project. Oh, actually I'm under Mac right now. I should be switching under Windows. Profiler settings right here, and you need to have voice inspector data turned on right here. That's a little weird one. You just have to look at the book for that. Basically, this is going to allow us to see the voice inspector data right here. So if I look at Harpy and what I want to do is connect the game, and so I'm going to connect to Cube, connect, and we can see all the stuff happening over here. And I haven't changed the game right now, but we can see that we can see there's some action happening right here. Let me make sure. Okay. Well, I'm gonna be running out of time right now. For this, from here out, I would say just look at the book. This one's a little bit it's a little bit confusing right here. You want to start capturing it, and then basically you can watch what's happening to the sound as it's coming through here. You can see what sounds are being like applied to it. It's pretty stinking cool. There's also, well, you have to go through and stop the profiler real quick. if we're under our F7, our banks, if I want to go to user settings, change override Windows, change where this is going to go. Remember, it goes to x86, audio kinetic, 2.5, cube, sound banks, Windows, select folder, and okay. I'll just do Windows for now, generate selected. And now it should have done any of the heartbeat stuff that I had. Well, yeah, we're
Well,
just
it
about
does
at
look
time.
like the profiler will show you the change if you simulate it in the transport control.
Oh yeah, that's true. I guess I didn't think about that. So if we have our F11, sorry, layouts, voice profiler. If we have it playing, there it was. Yeah. So with our heartbeat here, we have to actually turn on the profile. Like even if it's not connected, you can still start profiling right here, and we should be able to see it. Where's my health? Oh, because my health is probably at 100%. My transport a little bit bigger. Player life alive, and player life health, which is my health. Turn my health go down. Oh, I'm not playing. Yeah, there it goes. Yeah, we can see our voice changing here, and we can also, so this is what's interesting right here. This shows, and this is an important concept, that basically what it's going to do is it's going to this, we can see our gain change right here. So I'm at minus 2.3 dB. And basically what it does, it doesn't actually turn it down and turn it back up. It actually goes through and well, long story. We'll talk about that later. It's like understanding the gain, how gain works in here is kind of a weird subject. So at this point, basically we can go through and implement it and then start profiling the game and also make sure that it works. And they also go through one last thing is then there's talk about filtering it out. So when you want to watch the information coming from the game cube, a lot of times you want to look at just events. You want to look at just switch states. You want to look at just RTPCs. So like basically you can filter out, because there's a lot of stuff. Like this is our capture log right here. When you're playing the game in real life, there's a ton of stuff happening right here, and you want to be able to filter that out. So you can actually filter this right here and filter out some of the stuff that you want to just see as it's happening right there. So yeah, so you can see the state change. So this is the type. So event, state changes, we have RTPCs, and so on and so forth. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hit stop. I know because we're a little bit over on time right now, but I'll stick around for a second if anybody has any questions. But your job is, so right after this, I'm going to create the session 4 for this. So I'm going to hit stop on recording.